Welcome to Unit 2 of Comparative Politics. In this lecture, we will explore how political scientists study governments, institutions, and political processes using structured and comparative methods. We will focus on three major approaches that have shaped the field. First, the systems approach; second, the structural-functional approach; and third, the public policy perspective. These approaches are not just theoretical ideas. They are powerful tools used to understand how politics works, not just in one country, but across different societies and political systems. They help us answer important questions. How do governments respond to public demands? How are policies created and implemented? And what functions do political institutions perform? In the upcoming slides, we will take a closer look at each of these approaches, their key concepts, applications, and criticisms. Let's begin with the introduction to comparative methods. Let's begin by understanding what we mean by comparative approaches in political science. In the early days, the study of politics was mostly descriptive. Scholars would describe how a particular government or political institution worked, often without comparing it to others. But over time, political science evolved. Researchers wanted to go beyond description. They wanted to explain how political systems operate, how they change, and how they respond to different challenges. This is where comparative approaches became important. These approaches help us compare political systems, not just by looking at structures, like parliaments or courts, but also by analyzing the roles they play and the policies they produce. In modern comparative politics, three approaches stand out. The systems approach, which views politics as an interacting process. The structural-functional approach, which focuses on institutions and their roles. And the public policy perspective, which studies what governments actually do. By using these approaches, scholars aim to create a deeper, more scientific understanding of politics across nations and cultures. Now let's move forward and look at the genesis and orientation of the systems approach. Now we explore the systems approach, one of the earliest and most influential models in comparative politics. The systems approach was inspired by developments in other disciplines, especially biology, cybernetics, and engineering. It treats politics as an open system that constantly interacts with its environment. Just like a living organism responds to its surroundings, a political system responds to society's demands and expectations. This approach sees a political system as made up of interrelated structures and processes. These parts work together to maintain the system, adapt to changes, and produce decisions. What makes the systems approach unique is its focus on inputs and outputs. Inputs refers to public demands and support. And outputs refer to the decisions and actions taken by the political system in response to those demands. The system also uses feedback, which means it learns from the results of its actions and adjusts future decisions. This feedback loop helps the political system stay stable and relevant over time. Now that we understand the basic idea, let's move on to the next slide to examine the work of David Easton, the scholar who developed this theory in greater detail. Let's now take a closer look at David Easton's conceptual framework, one of the most important contributions to the systems approach. Easton believed that political systems could be studied scientifically, like biological systems. He identified three phases in the development of his model. The first one was the descriptive phase, where the goal was simply to describe political behavior and institutions. The second was the analytical phase, which focused on identifying the core concepts and relationships within the system, such as input, output, and feedback. And the third was the theoretical phase, where he developed abstract models that could be applied to different political systems, including non-Western countries. Easton defined a political system as a set of interactions through which values are authoritatively allocated for society. In simpler terms, it's how society decides who gets what, when, and how those decisions are accepted as legitimate. His model emphasized stability and adaptability. A political system must process public demands and maintain support from the people in order to survive. In the next slide, we'll explore the influences that helped shape Easton's thinking, including ideas from sociology, cybernetics, and economics. Now let's understand the key influences that shaped David Easton's systems approach. His ideas didn't emerge in isolation, they were shaped by important thinkers and fields of study. The first major influence was Talcott Parsons, a sociologist known for his theory of social systems. According to Parsons, societies are made up of interrelated parts that function together to maintain stability. And Easton applied this same logic to political systems. The second influence was Max Weber, a German sociologist who emphasized the importance of authority, legitimacy, and bureaucracy in governance. Weber's ideas helped Easton think about how political systems maintain support and respond to demands. A third influence was economics, especially the concept of input-output models, where resources enter a system and are converted into outcomes. Easton used this idea to explain how public demands, or inputs, are transformed into political decisions, or outputs. Lastly, Easton was influenced by cybernetics, a field that focuses on control systems and feedback. This helped him include the concept of feedback loops, where the system learns from its past decisions and adjusts accordingly. So, as we can see, Easton's model is a result of combining sociology, economics, and systems theory to create a holistic view of political life. Now let's move ahead and see how this systems analysis is applied in real-world political studies. Now that we understand Easton's model, let's see how the systems approach is applied in political studies. This approach is especially useful for analyzing how a political system maintains stability and responds to challenges over time. One of the earliest applications came from Karl Deutsch, who used the systems approach to explain the role of communication in politics. Deutsch argued that the effectiveness of a political system depends on its ability to receive information, process it, and respond efficiently. Another application came from J. David Singer, who applied input-output analysis to foreign policy decisions. Singer explored how international systems respond to pressures and how policies are shaped through feedback from global events. These examples show that systems analysis isn't just a theory, it's a flexible tool used to explain real-world political behavior, whether it's domestic or international. However, while useful, this method is not without flaws. In the next slide, we'll examine the main criticisms of the systems approach. While the systems approach has been influential in political science, it has also faced several important criticisms. The first major critique is that the model is too abstract. It uses generalized terms like inputs and outputs without clearly defining them in measurable ways. Because of this, it becomes difficult to apply the model empirically in real-world political analysis. The second criticism is that it assumes stability and harmony within the political system. But in reality, many political systems face conflict, disruption, and rapid change. The model does not give enough attention to power struggles, inequality, or oppression, which are central to understanding politics, especially in developing nations. Another major concern is that the systems approach is Western biased. It was built using Western political systems as the norm, and it may not accurately capture the complexities of non-Western countries. Despite these issues, the systems approach remains a foundational tool in comparative politics, but it must be applied with awareness of its limits. Now, let's move on to our next major approach, the structural functional framework, especially as developed by Gabriel Almond. Now let's explore the structural functional approach, which was developed by Gabriel Almond. This approach builds on ideas from sociology, especially the work of Talcott Parsons, and applies them to political systems. The main idea here is that every political system has certain structures, like legislatures, courts, or executives, and these structures perform specific functions to keep the system running. Almond argued that we can analyze any political system, whether Western or non-Western, by identifying these core structures and the roles they play. His model went through 3 phases of development. First, he built a general theory of political systems. Second, he used this theory to empirically compare political systems across countries. And third, he applied this framework to study newly independent and developing nations. One of Almond's unique contributions was the concept of pattern variables, which describe how cultural values influence political behavior. He also emphasized the importance of political culture, the shared values and beliefs that shape how a society understands authority, participation, and legitimacy. In the next slide, we'll look at the intellectual influences that helped shape Almond's ideas. Now let's explore the key influences that helped shape Gabriel Almond's structural functional framework. Just like Easton, Almond was heavily influenced by Talcott Parsons, especially Parsons' idea that all societies have core structures that perform necessary functions. Almond adapted this idea for political analysis, applying it not just to Western democracies but to all types of political systems. Another influence was pluralism, which sees society as made up of multiple, competing interest groups. This helped Almond understand how different actors, like political parties, interest groups, and the media, contribute to the overall functioning of a political system. Liberalism also played a role in shaping Almond's thinking. He believed in the importance of individual rights, democratic participation, and limited government, all central ideas in liberal thought. Almond combined these influences to build a model that could be universally applied to both developed and developing nations by focusing on functions instead of just institutional labels. In the next slide, we'll look at how Almond translated this theory into a practical model using inputs, outputs, and political functions. Now let's look at Gabriel Almond's functional model, which is at the heart of the structural functional approach. Almond believed that every political system, no matter how different, performs certain key functions to survive and operate effectively. These functions are divided into two main categories. First, input functions, such as political socialization, interest articulation, and interest aggregation. And second, output functions, such as rule-making, rule application, and rule adjudication. Almond's model shows how a political system receives demands from society, processes them through various structures, and then produces decisions and actions. This entire process is known as the conversion process, where public inputs are converted into political outputs. He also used diagrams to represent how the system interacts with its environment, much like Easton's model, but Almond placed more emphasis on what roles are played and who performs them. By focusing on functions instead of specific institutions, Almond's model allowed for meaningful comparison across very different political systems. Next, we'll turn to some of the major criticisms of Almond's methodology. While Almond's structural functional approach is widely recognized, it has also received strong criticism from several scholars. The first major critique is that the model involves conceptual confusion. Many of the terms, such as function or structure, are used too broadly, making it difficult to define and measure them clearly. Another criticism is that the model often leads to vague generalizations. By trying to create a universal framework, Almond ends up oversimplifying the complex realities of different political systems. Scholars have also accused the model of having a conservative bias. It focuses too much on system stability and not enough on conflict, change, or power struggles, which are central to real-world politics. One major concern is that it assumes all political systems perform the same functions, just through different structures. But critics argue that not all societies share the same goals or values, and trying to compare them on one single framework is misleading. Well-known thinkers like Don Martindale, C. Wright Mills, and S. E. Feiner have all questioned the ideological and practical limitations of Almond's approach. Despite these critiques, Almond's work remains important, especially for introducing a functional way of comparing diverse political systems. In the next slide, we'll shift to our final major approach, the public policy perspective. Now let's explore the public policy perspective, which is the third major approach in this unit. Unlike the systems or structural functional approaches, this perspective focuses on what governments actually do, especially in terms of policy outputs and decision-making. It moves beyond the study of political institutions and asks deeper questions like, what kinds of decisions do states make? Who benefits from those decisions? And how are public resources allocated? This approach helps bridge the gap between political science and public administration. It is particularly useful for evaluating performance, whether a government's policies are effective, efficient, or fair. Scholars like David Easton, Harold Liswell, and Thomas Dye have all contributed to shaping this perspective. Their work focuses on how public problems are identified, how agendas are formed, and how solutions are implemented. This approach also opens the door for comparative studies of development policies, education reforms, health systems, and more. So rather than asking, what is the system? The public policy approach asks, what does the system actually produce? In the next slide, we'll explore how Marxist and elite theories have interpreted the role of public policy in society. Now let's take a look at how Marxist and elite theory interprets public policy. Both these perspectives question the idea that governments are neutral or work in public interest. Let's start with C. Wright Mills, who introduced the concept of the power elite. According to Mills, a small group of elites, from business, military, and politics, dominate decision-making in society. Public policy, in this view, is not about solving people's problems. It's about protecting the interests of those in power. Similarly, Ralph Miliband, a Marxist theorist, argued that the state is not a neutral body. He believed the state serves the interests of the capitalist class by controlling laws, economic policies, and even social narratives. In both cases, public policy is seen as a tool for maintaining domination, not equality. These views encourage us to critically examine who controls the policy process, whose interests are prioritized, and who gets left behind. Now that we've seen these critical perspectives, let's move to the core elements of the policy-making process, the practical stages from agenda to evaluation. Now let's break down the 6 core components of the policy-making process. These are the key stages through which a public policy moves, from the moment an issue is recognized to the point where its impact is reviewed. The first component is context. This refers to the social, political, and economic environment in which policies are made. For example, a health policy created during a pandemic will be very different from one created during normal times. The second stage is agenda setting. Here, certain issues are selected for action, while others are left out. Power and influence play a big role in what makes it onto the agenda. The third component is actors. These include politicians, bureaucrats, experts, interest groups, and even citizens, all of whom influence policy decisions. The fourth stage is content. This is where the actual details of the policy are formed, including objectives, strategies, and resources. This stage determines what the policy will look like. Next comes delivery, the fifth component. This involves the practical steps to implement the policy, such as setting up programs, allocating funds, and managing personnel. And finally, the sixth component is evaluation and feedback. This stage examines the results of the policy. Did it meet its goals? What problems emerged? How can it be improved? This feedback loop connects back to the system, helping future policies to be more effective and informed. With that, we now reach the final slide, the summary of everything we've covered in this unit. Let's now recap what we've learned in this unit on comparative approaches and methods. We began with the systems approach, primarily developed by David Easton. This approach views politics as an open system, processing inputs like demands and support, and producing outputs such as laws and policies. It emphasizes feedback, adaptation, and system stability. However, it has been criticized for being too abstract and Western-centric. Next, we explored the structural-functional approach by Gabriel Almond. This model examines the structures within a political system and the functions they perform, like rule-making, interest articulation, or political socialization. Almond's model helped make comparisons across diverse political systems possible, but it too faced criticism for being overly general and lacking in attention to power and conflict. Finally, we studied the public policy perspective. This approach focuses on what governments actually do, examining how policies are formed, implemented, and evaluated. We also looked at Marxist and elite theories, which argue that policies often reflect the interests of dominant classes rather than the general public. And we explored the 6 key components of policy making, from context and agenda setting to evaluation and feedback. Together, these 3 approaches offer powerful tools for analyzing political systems, each with its own strengths, limitations, and areas of application. Understanding these frameworks allows us to study politics more scientifically, and with greater awareness of how systems really work in the real world. Thank you for joining this session. Today, we explored key comparative approaches like the systems, structural, functional, and public policy perspectives, and how they help analyze political systems across countries. In our next session, we'll study Unit 3, Political Economy, Dependency, and World Systems. We'll see how thinkers like Marx, Lenin, and Wallerstein explain global inequality, underdevelopment, and power relations between the global North and South. See you in the next session.